Okay, so here is part three. Thought I could fit it into two parts, but here's part three, and this is 1.5 of our chapter one. So the final part of our chapter one. So there's a lot of details, like I said, to go with this and a lot of terms. I'm also going to post a good YouTube video to help go along with this. And so it will be a big part of learning the parts and how does the entire process all work together with our immunity or our immune response. So hopefully I'm going to cover over these antibody antigens again, our defenses, non-specific and then specific and memory defenses. With this, if we can remember antibodies, I talked about them a little bit, and antigens on blood typing. And here you can see is the antibody is that protein, and the antigens are attached to whatever's on the outside of the cell, whether it's blood that will have a certain type of antigen marker, or it is an invading microbe, whether it's a virus or a bacteria. It's these antigen markers that kind of signify of what this is. So when we're talking about these defenses, we could think of like our body as a giant castle, and it's a fortress trying to keep whatever's inside safe, which makes sense. We want to keep ourselves healthy. And so our first two defenses is non-specific. Our third line of defense is the specialized, and it's very specific immune response. And when we think of it, our first line is just a physical chemical barrier. This is why we're being told to wash hands right now during this COVID outbreak, is because our physical and chemical barriers need to be maintained. So we need to keep our hands washed and clean so we're not introducing them into our mouth or our nose. And so this is non-specific because it just keeps everything out. It doesn't target certain things, it just keeps everything out. Same thing with the inflammatory response. When you get a cut or a scrape, it doesn't matter what's there. It's going to send help to swell the area, to rush blood there, send a bunch of white blood cells there, and it's just going to clear out everything and try to help clear out the cut. It doesn't care what it is. It's just non-specific. Our third one is specialized, and it's specifically for our immune response. And so this is once something's gotten past the first two lines of defense. Now we need to step up our body's game and actually defend our fortress or our castle that we are as a human. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker through some of these terms because I have, like I said, another YouTube video that will go along with it to help, but also we need to learn the terms and the systems for ourselves, so I don't need to just reread it through for you. But when we think of our first line of defense as these physical barriers, it's our skin. It's our sweat that helps kill bacteria. It's our saliva that helps kill any kind of bacteria that might be in our mouths. We have our respiratory system, so we have mucus and we have nose hairs to catch all these little tiny microbes. And it's swept away, or we blow our nose, or when we get dust in our nose, we blow it out into a Kleenex. If we remember, if we ever watched Osmosis Jones as a kid, it was a young cartoon about how we just need to have these defenses to set up to help protect us unless we actually ingest something or it gets past. Still paired under with our first lines of defense are also chemical barriers. So you think when we do eat something bad, well, our stomach is a big pool of acid. So as long as it doesn't get stuck to our throat somewhere along the way, hopefully our stomach takes care of anything and it destroys a lot of foreign cells. And it tears apart different things and it kills this bacteria. And the skin keeps a low pH, so it's acidic enough to help prevent microbe growth. We help that along, and why do you think soap is slightly basic to help clean our skin? But then when we sweat and we have this natural acidity to our skin, it just helps us from not just growing bacteria all over our cells. Our second line of defense now is the inflammatory response. And what this is these leukocytes, or white blood cells, if we remember, and it involves us having a rush of blood to an area to inflame it, and it just sends in these phagocytes, and it's targeting these invading microbes. And so a phagocyte, or this phagocytosis, is a large white blood cell that's just going to eat anything. And anything that's coming in, it's going to eat it right away. And you can see right here, pathogens get in with a cut or something because there's just bacteria and dirt and grime on it. It might not actually harm us, but it doesn't care. It's going to eat anything and everything. And it's going to send out these little chemical signals, and it's going to actually eat whatever's been in there. And then hopefully our platelets will now start causing fibrin to be produced, and then we can start clotting it and we can reseal our first line of defense. The first two lines of defense are pretty straightforward. We've probably seen them in action because, well, we've grown up and lived and we've gotten scrapes and cuts, or we wash our skin so we keep nice and clean. The third line of defense is a little bit tougher to see or kind of put into practice, but we're going to talk about it and how do we actually destroy bacteria or destroy viruses or destroy invading pathogens in our body. And so we have something called lymphocytes, and they're a type of white blood cell. There's two types, a T cell and a B cell. These T cells are helper messenger cells. These helper T cells, they help out things. They're produced in bone marrow and they're stored in the lymph tissues, or these things called lymph nodes. And they store up all these white blood cells so that way we can respond quicker and we don't have to wait for bone marrow to produce it. We store them up in our lymph nodes and we have them all over our body. These recognize antigens and foreign cells. So they just are floating around and it's just, okay, they're in the blood and wait, something's not right, they'll recognize it. And they seek out and they signal to the B cells. So that's what the helper or these messenger T cells will do. They'll send out the alarm or the warning. The signal then that these helper T cells send out help the B cells to start dividing and producing specific antibodies. Now, another type of T cell is a little bit cooler named of a killer T cell. So a little bit different than the messenger or that helper T cell that sends out signals for the B cells to come. These killer T cells do exactly that. They kill and they penetrate the cell membranes of the invaders. They destroy these invading pathogens, and they could have contained the virus, or they can be mutated cells that could develop into cancer. And so they're going around trying to just kill and destroy different invaders. And this video that was a cellular look at the immune response, we'll talk about that in that video I'm going to post right below this one. We have a few other types of T cells too. And unfortunately, I started with the killer T cell as one of the cool named ones, but we have suppressor T cells. And so they do exactly that. They suppress the T cells. And once the foreign invaders are destroyed, they suppress the immune system from keep going. And they tell it to shut down and say, okay, we won the battle, let's slow down. And then we also have memory T cells. And so they remember and they take a catalog and they remember what this invader was and they remember the antigen markers. And so if they were to get caught by it again, it will not be as bad. Or it will be something where, okay, we've seen this before. They have the antigen antibody markers and go from there and, okay, let's fight this off quicker than the first time. And so this is important because we're going to talk about how we use this as medical technology to help fight off things like viruses. Now, let's come back to that other type of lymphocyte, these B cells. We talked about the different types of T cells we're going to learn about. Now let's talk about a B cell because there's a specific function for a B cell. And these B cells are these memory B cells and they multiply and they produce these antibodies that are so important. And each type of B cell only can produce a single type of antibody. And so that's why it's so important with these memory T cells. And then we can have these B cells remember what the antibodies are needed to attach to these antigen markers. And so that's why COVID is so dangerous is no one has any kind of B cells to actually target COVID. Our body fights it off, but it takes about 14 days, we're seeing. The only dangerous part is no one has an immunity to it, and this is very dangerous. These antibodies, they are specific for a particular bacteria or virus. And so that's what doctors are doing right now is they're trying to figure out if someone that contracted COVID, do they have now an immunity to it, or will it change, will it morph, and uh-oh, the dangerous part is these B cells don't work if they contract COVID again or another strain of it. Or on the same thing, antibodies for the cold virus can't fight an HIV virus as well. And these antibodies don't go across. So if it slightly changes, it doesn't always work. And so that's what we're trying to figure out, or I'm not, but doctors are trying to figure out how does our body respond to multiple exposures of this COVID virus. So hopefully I'm going to go a little bit quicker because now we're going to talk about how we actually have these invaders and how it changes between these different types of T cells and B cells and everything. But that video I'm going to attach will explain it a little bit more in depth, and it's just a different type of animation. It's not just PowerPoints. So watch through that one and that will help with the summary, and you can kind of follow these 5 stages of the immune response. Here is a quick little summary of some of the terms we talked about. Also, if you open up your textbook and you'll see a big kind of page right at that 1.5, there's a big kind of detailed list, and there's 14 different stages, I think, or 12 different stages, and it's talking about how all these are working together. So this is the important part. Understand some of the details here, understand the terminology, but we need to know how all these systems work together. And I haven't really gone over that a ton. I just went over a lot of general details. That's what the other video is important for, is it's going to talk about how all of these kind of work together in a seamless system. And so it's important to watch this other video to talk fully about how does this immune response function fully. Lastly, I just want to talk on vaccinations. I know this is a hot topic because a lot of people are talking about this anti-vaccines and not necessarily being a proponent of vaccinations. Well, that's what we're trying to discover right now, or figure out what is a proper vaccine for this COVID virus or this dangerous pandemic that we're going through. Is can we actually have a vaccination that will help us and help protect us? Vaccinations are very important because this immunity can be acquired naturally, or we can acquire immunity artificially. And this is what vaccinations are. It's an artificial immunity that creates immunity so we can fight it off at a later date. And whether it is alive, the pathogen, and it's just been weakened, or it's actually just some of the dead microbes that have been weakened, and our body can actually start to make some of these B cells so we can fight it off when we contract it later. We do this a lot with the cold and flu season, and they have this flu virus and they'll vaccinate for it. If you come in contact with the flu, you might be sick for a day, but you will not get the full-on flu. The flu is actually very dangerous, and it kills hundreds of thousands of people a year, and it can be very dangerous. Just like COVID, it can become very dangerous. This is why vaccinations are so important, because we're trying to get an immunity when we have no immunity. Lastly, on this big topic of immunity, I'm going to talk about autoimmune diseases. And so I'm not going to go in depth a ton about them, but essentially an autoimmune disease is where the body mistakenly attacks its own self, or the body attacks the body, and it recognizes things like your skin or joints as foreign. And when you think of rheumatoid arthritis, that's where your body's attacking these joints, and it makes it very, very painful, and you have this joint pain. And so these autoimmune diseases can be inherited genetically, and it's very difficult. Some are manageable, but some can be very, very dangerous. And when you think of it, like AIDS, It is sometimes very dangerous because your body can then not fight off other invaders. And so some autoimmune diseases are potentially dangerous. So with that, we're closing out our chapter 1 and all the talks about immunity. So please watch the other video, The Magic Doctor, and good luck studying for the quiz.